2 p.m. advisory, you see it right there on your screen. Hurricane Milton continuing to gradually decrease in intensity. Currently sustained winds of 130 miles per hour. It's now just 130 miles west of Fort Myers and 150 miles to the southwest of the Tampa Bay area. So right now we're in about that 10 to 12 hour window away from a potential landfall there. And you can kind of see the western side of the storm not looking nearly as symmetrical as what we saw at this time yesterday. You had a very defined eye, some wind shear kind of breaking things up a little bit on the northern extent of the storm. The western side, drier air also being pulled in, but still is a strong and healthy Category 4 storm, still though expected to decrease in intensity just before landfall, likely making landfall just to the south of the Tampa Bay area, likely right around Bradenton, the Sarasota area, even the Siesta Key area there along the Gulf Coast of Florida as a major Category 3 hurricane just after midnight tonight, and likely will continue to sustain that hurricane status all the way across central Florida and the Florida Peninsula until it finally crosses into the Atlantic by tomorrow morning and then continuing into tomorrow afternoon. Still though, moving at a pretty steady pace, north-northeast at about 16 miles per hour. So here's just a quick look at what some of those spaghetti models are showing. We have seen the consistent trend of a little bit more of a southward track. So we're pretty locked in on a fairly decent area of where it will likely make landfall and how it will parallel I-4 as it heads across the state. But here's another way to look at it. Again, I had mentioned the wind shear kind of pulling things up to the north and northeast on the north side of Milton, but all that dry air, those bright orange, tan, yellow colors, that's the dry air being kind of pulled in on the western and southwestern side of the storm. So that is helping to gradually weaken Milton here over the next couple of hours and days. But still, a ton going on, and still a very, very dangerous storm as it does barrel down on Florida's Gulf Coast. Live look on radar now. We're going to get hourly updates now since the storm is within radar shot. All of Central and South Florida just engulfed in tornado warnings. Let's count them on there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you got at least more than a half dozen, if not to 10 separate tornado warnings in effect from the south sides of Orlando all the way down to the eastern sides of Fort Myers. So a ton of rotating supercells for those folks across the southern peninsula. Here closer to home across the First Coast, really I-10 is kind of breaking or the dividing line, that inflection point of where it is raining and where it isn't raining. So if you live really north of the Jacksonville International Airport, you're pretty dry for the time being. Now south of there, that rain gradually intensifies and gets steadier and steadier. So from St. Augustine south down through southern St. Johns County, all of Flagler County, nearly all of Putnam County, and Alachua County over towards Gainesville, seeing some fairly moderate to heavy rainfall. We're just going to continue to see that increase throughout the remainder of tonight and especially overnight and into early tomorrow morning. So we really haven't changed all that much what our expected rainfall totals are going to be. For much of Duval in the Jacksonville area, looking closer to about 4, maybe upwards of 5 to 6 inches, but I think 4 is really the best bet for many of us. Higher totals are going to be seen further south. Similar story with the wind gusts. Sustained winds 30 to 40 miles per hour for much of Jacksonville and Duval County. Similar story for Nassau and Clay, northern St. Johns County as well, with wind gusts closer to about 60 to potentially 70 miles per hour. The worst of the wind, though, will certainly be from St. Augustine down towards Palm Coast and Daytona Beach. Our more southern tier portion of the First Coast is going to see the strongest wind gusts, which will certainly cause or potentially cause widespread power outages, extensive damage to trees, tree limbs, and potentially roof damage and really just property damage there as well. So that red shaded area, that's where you're going to possibly see hurricane force wind gusts in excess of 75 to 80 miles per hour, potentially even higher than that. So that's a quick look at the winds. Storm surge also going to be a major concern, not necessarily just for the beachfront, but particularly for the intercoastal waterways, those intertidal zones, and some of the major rivers here across the First Coast. That's going to be the St. Johns River, obviously our biggest one, but the Trout River as well, and some of those smaller creeks could begin to get backed up as we see those strong northeasterly winds continue to hold or kind of just plug up the water back up the channel of the rivers there. So for our more coastal areas, so yes, the beaches, but particularly more so if you live on that intercoastal side, about a 3 to 5 foot storm surge is possible. Different story for the St. Johns River. Still, yes, you are going to see the water come up, but likely closer to about a 2 to 4-foot storm surge for those folks. So here we're just going to break it down quick, county by county. We've been going through this here over the past couple of days, but if you have missed anything, we're on your side with one quick look. So for our southern counties, Putnam, Flagler counties, likely the worst effects of Hurricane Milton here. Sustained winds 50 to 60, 65 miles per hour even. Wind gusts 75 miles per hour, if not greater than that. Heaviest rainfall, 6 to 12 inches of rain. And again, that storm surge threat of potentially 2 to 4 feet, excuse me, especially for the river and those intercoastal areas. Now, heading a little bit further north, St. Johns County, surge 3 to 5 feet. Winds slightly lower, but still going to cause some major issues and concerns. Again, those power outages and tree damage is still very, very possible. Rainfall maybe a little bit lower, only about 5 to 10 inches, but still we've already seen some flooding in some of the fields down there in St. Johns County. So that concern and worry is just going to continue to grow here throughout the remainder of tonight. And like I had said, into early tomorrow morning. Now, further north, again, the worst impacts are just going to decrease and get lesser the further north and west you go here across the first coast. So sustained winds, like I had mentioned for Jacksonville, 30 to 40, gusts between really about 60 and 70 miles per hour, especially on the beachhead and the beachfront. Rainfall, that says about 4 to 8 inches. I think that's definitely going to be on the higher side. The most likely rainfall is more so probably going to be about 2 to 6 inches, which puts that 4-inch mark for rainfall for the Jacksonville area pretty much right in the sweet spot. For Nassau, Glenn, Camden counties, surge still possible, a little bit lower. Winds still gusty, but not necessarily reaching that severe criteria of 60 mile per hour wind gusts or greater. And also, there's going to be a very steep gradient with regards to the rainfall. So the further north you go, those rainfall totals will drastically begin to cut off and taper off. And again, that's a similar story if you live out further west for Baker County, Union, Bradford, and Columbia counties there as well. And then up towards the Okefenokee, we won't forget about you folks. Obviously, you were probably the hardest hit with regards to Hurricane Helene just 2 weeks ago. You still will see some rain, some gusty winds, 30, maybe upwards of 40 miles per hour. But thankfully, it will not be nearly as bad for you folks up there. So here is just kind of one quick last look at what Hurricane Milton currently looks like there. Likely about maybe 10, 12 hours at most away from that landfall along Florida's Gulf Coast. But we're also going to change things up a little bit. We're going to have some help here today. We're bringing in icon and legend, Jeannie Blaylock. She's got some questions from some of our viewers here for me this afternoon, well, Jeannie.
So. I have to say, when my alarm went off this morning, I was like, okay, it's Wednesday. Oh no, it's the day. It's the day.
It's another one.
So maybe you've lived in Florida for a really long time like I have, or in Georgia, and you're used to this, but somehow this one seems different. So we're getting a lot of questions. This question comes from 2 different people. It's the same question from Boblets Michelle and from Cheryl Clax. We want to give you a chance to ask your questions. So just go on the Facebook Weather Watchers page, and you'll be able to see First Coast News Weather Watchers. Join in the comments and ask what's ever on your mind. Anyway, these 2 nice folks say, how bad can we expect the flooding in San Marco? And then she says, I'm wondering the same thing. And then I'll add in, as the third person to ask the question, I was in San Marco this morning, and the question I kept getting was, is this going to be like Irma? I hope not. So what do you say then?
Well, so it definitely will not be as bad as Irma. I do have a graphic here. We're going to show it coming up on the news later this afternoon and evening. There will be some significant street flooding, I believe, in San Marco, the worst of which will likely happen overnight tonight and really closer to sunrise tomorrow. That's when our strongest wind gusts are going to be, really between maybe about 4 and 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. The river will come up about 2 to 3 feet. So yes, you will see right there along the river some minor flooding coming up, but certainly do not expect it to be nearly as bad as what Hurricane Irma did a few years ago, Jeannie. So yes, there will be some, but not nearly as bad as what we had seen.
Yeah, we were going back over some of those bad memories of Irma. I mean, Irma was up a couple feet in the stores. I mean, just water standing there. And they had to rip off the walls because it damaged the contents of the stores. And if you went in San Marco after Irma, you saw people tearing out their whole first floors. And there were piles of debris, construction, and couches and furniture items everywhere. And people have not forgotten that. So that's why they're asking this question. So when you say some flooding, maybe, are we talking about how high up in a store, say San Marco Boulevard?
So potentially maybe upwards of a foot. Again, the river's got to come up at least 2 to 3 feet. After that 3 foot range, you're really going to start to see some of that flooding getting into some of the businesses and homes. So we'll be right near that threshold. But especially for Duval County, our storm surge threat will be a little bit lower than some of those folks down in St. Johns County and Flagler, even the eastern sides of Putnam County. So it will certainly be a possibility. Street flooding, I think, will certainly be a concern just with the freshwater or, rainfall. But we're not expecting, mass flooding throughout either San Marco or Riverside, for some of those areas that are more, flood prone, Jeannie.
Okay, here's somebody from Ray Kimberly Broach. I'm assuming she needs to go somewhere at 5 o'clock today, so she's checking in with you. How bad will the winds be and the rain to about 5 o'clock today?
So really not that, now where's she coming from? Did she say?
She didn't say, not sure.
Okay, well, so if you live north of Jacksonville, you'll be all right up until 5 o'clock, because what time is it now? 2:15. So the rain really not that bad north of I-10. South of I-10, the rain will gradually increase. From St. Augustine south, you're going to start to see some moderate to heavy rainfall, certainly causing some traffic concerns down there. So if you live in St. Johns County, yes, you're going to see some rain, potential ponding on some of the roadways. Roadways should not be flooded yet up until 5 o'clock, so that is good news. With regards to the wind, sustained winds are only about 10 to 20 miles per hour, some gusts upwards of about 25 to 30, and that's really not going to increase until about sunset tonight, and then really more so overnight or even after midnight. So the wind and the rain still shouldn't be too bad if you got to be out there on the roads, driving around anywhere. Whether you're trying to get those last minute storm preps, done, Jeannie, they should be okay.
All right, I want to say to Beth Risky, everybody in Nassau County appreciates your asking about Nassau County. So here she goes. What can we expect in Yulee and Fernandina, and when will the worst hit for us?
So Yulee and Fernandina, wind gusts anywhere from about 50 to 60 miles per hour, the worst of which will likely happen very early tomorrow morning. So think 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., probably really going to be the worst of the storm there for Fernandina Beach, because you had mentioned Fernandina, right? Mm-hmm. The storm surge there, 1 to 3 feet. So you could, again, see the water rise up. I don't expect there to be a ton of homes or businesses impacted by that. Maybe just kind of up into the backyard, but not necessarily the home specifically. And maybe just some minor street flooding. But the rainfall also not going to be nearly as high up there, only maybe 2 to 4 inches at most, with regards to the rain for most of Nassau County. So the further north you go, the better it will be. It's still going to be stormy, still going to be rainy and windy, but not nearly as bad as some of our more southern areas. So worst of it right around sunrise tomorrow morning up until, I'd say, maybe 8 or 9 a.m.
All right, I want to say, Sherry Johnson, you're a brave lady. She is on our First Coast News Weather Watchers page on Facebook. That's where we're getting these questions, so feel free to ask whatever you want. But Sherry, it's the question that we all are wondering and nobody has the nerve to ask, but she's asking it, is there another system behind this one that no one is talking about? So, all right, is there...
Thankfully, hey, that's a great question. I think we're all concerned because we've gotten, a triple whammy now. We had Debbie back in the middle of August. A month later, we got Helene. Now we have Hurricane Milton. Thankfully, there's nothing on the radar on our agenda, at least for the next 7 days, that could impact Florida. Now, off to our east, out into the Atlantic, there is another area that the National Hurricane Center is watching for potential development over the next 7 days, has a medium chance of formation. But again, that would go well out into the ocean, would not impact us. So for the time being, we are only concerned about Hurricane Milton and are not expecting anything after him, again, at least for the next 7 days. And remember,
Okay.
everything will continue to lessen with regards to our chances for tropical formation and a hurricane. Yes, the oceans are still very, very warm, but our chances are going to get lesser and lesser the closer we get to Halloween and also to Thanksgiving. So cross your fingers and kind of start to pray that things really begin to improve here throughout the fall.
I don't know about you guys, but I like to think about having some turkey and being done with this whole season. Like, just letting it go away. It's like, oh dear, and then it comes again next year. But that's a long way off, so we'll just get through this all together today. So Lee Langford, Brunswick. And I know that's talking up in Georgia.
Yep.
But they've been through it all, as you know, and so they don't want anything else. And she's saying, she says she's a little bit nervous about this, but what can you do to reassure her? Maybe it's not so bad.
Well, so the Brunswick area, the wind gusts shouldn't be nearly as bad as what we saw with Hurricane Helene. Your sustained winds, maybe 20 to 30 miles per hour, wind gusts upwards of 40 to 50. Maybe an isolated wind gust upwards of 60, which would be that severe criteria. But the rainfall, not going to be nearly as bad. I know they've had a lot of flooding concerns just kind of throughout the summer with some of our summer thunderstorms. So the freshwater rainfall flooding shouldn't be a major concern for the Brunswick area or really any part of Camden or Glenn County. And the storm surge, only about a 1 to 2 foot surge up there. So not something to be overly concerned about.
I say Georgia needs a break.
They do.
They need a break. So
yes.
You can just take a breath, and that's good. So let's talk a little bit about, did you just say there were 10 tornado warnings south of here?
Yes, there
was.
Not
on the first coast, but we go back to that. I kind of looked at that and went, whoo.
Let me see if I can pull back up here.
And we expect tornado warnings and so forth with a monster hurricane like this. But that leads me to this question. Who on the first coast, which areas may be more susceptible to tornado warnings for Milton?
Yeah, so that's honestly a great question. Thankfully, compared to Helene, our tornado threat should be much lower. For Helene, because she passed off to our west, we were kind of on that right front quadrant, that dirty side of the storm. This time, because Milton is crossing from west to east off to our south, we are going to be on the north side of it. So some of our southern counties will see an isolated tornado risk. I mean, Flagler County, really the southern half of Putnam, and potentially the southern half of St. Johns County will have an isolated risk. For Clay, Duval County, Nassau County, and pretty much all of our Georgia counties, the tornado risk is not zero, but it is very close to it. So that's maybe, a silver lining in all of this is that at least the tornado threat for many of us will be much lower than what we experienced with Hurricane Helene.
Okay, Renee, I think you have a good question here. I'm not sure how to say your last name. I think it's Hombach. I hope I didn't mess that up, but it says, could it wobble again and move north and then east to Jax? It's like, are we sure that the big bad hit isn't going to be here again after, say, the Tampa area, wherever it goes tonight?
Yeah, so once you get to about the 72 to 48 hour mark, you still will see those wobbles. At this point, we are very locked in. It looks like it is going to make landfall just to the south of Tampa near the Sarasota area. So there might be wobbles that would greatly change the impacts for those specific locations on the Gulf Coast. But for us here at home, it is still going to cross right across Central Florida. It will not turn up towards Jacksonville. So our impacts, our worries and concerns, we are locked into that. We are not expecting any major changes with the forecast that would dictate, a change in the impacts that we see here at home, Jeannie.
And this is kind of a follow-up. I am so sorry, I lost track of who asked this, but I thought it was a good question. Could it go out to the Atlantic and then come back to Jacksonville? I mean, everybody's worried about it. So.
Well, so Hurricane Dora did that. We're not expecting that. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. There's an upper level jet stream and front that is coming on through. That's going to pick up Milton, pull it out off into the Atlantic Ocean, and then we'll continue east and far away from us. So it's not going to do a loop-de-loop and recurve and try and come back and hit us. We're going to be one and done with Milton once it comes through.
I love the one and done. Way better than the loop-de-loop. Let's not even think about the loop-de-loop.
Yes.
So, and I hate to pin you guys down because you don't have a crystal ball, but we appreciate all the. I mean, these guys comb through so much data. You should see them. They're all conferring and looking over the computer models. I mean, you guys are in the whole scientific realm about this. But people are always asking, do you think the bridges are going to close? And I know we have big bridges and little bridges. When I first moved to town, it was all by color because I didn't know where I was going. They could go on the red bridge, that's the Matthews Bridge.
Yes.
Go on the blue bridge, that's the Main Street Bridge. But Main Street Bridge usually will stay open. But if you're looking at any bridges tonight, which ones would maybe concern you the most that might be susceptible to closing?
The Dames Point Bridge certainly could, especially because we're getting crosswinds from east to west or northeast to southeast. Or southwest, I should say. So the Dames Point, I think, could maybe close. That would probably happen after midnight, though. So any plans this evening that you have to cross a bridge, you should be okay up until sunset. And then by tomorrow morning, if you're happening to be out on the roads, which you shouldn't be. But if you are, I would say the Dames Point, potentially the Hart and Matthews. But at this time, we don't really expect that to be the case, especially for Duval County. Just because our wind gusts really aren't going to be all that dissimilar from Hurricane Helene. and we didn't have any bridges closed for Helene, did we?
No, not here.
Yeah. So.
All right, so let's talk about St. Augustine. I got married in St. Augustine. I love St. Augustine. And I hate to see any kind of problem down there, but we all rode through Matthew. And I remember so clearly on Anastasia Island, not just Davis Shores, but that whole first strip. If you ever eaten at Osteen's, that wonderful, that's been there for 50 plus years. They serve shrimp there, and there's an antique store right across. And they flooded out in Matthew. And the town turned out and got them back going again, the drying out the cooking utensils and the knives and forks and everything. But I know it makes them nervous. And
yes.
So tell us a little bit about what we can expect in St. Augustine and Anastasia Island. Yeah.
Yeah, so for Hurricane Matthew, the storm surge was about 5 to 7 feet. For Hurricane Milton, this time around, we're expecting about a 3 to 5 foot surge. So how high was the water in Matthew? Or in Michael?
I'm sorry, I don't have those stats in my head. I don't want to be wrong.
Okay.
So,
yeah, so
I can tell you where it went on the wall, though, from my non-meteorological degree.
So there will be some flooding potentially into some of those homes and businesses. Again, 3 to 5 feet. That storm was 5 to 7, so it will not be nearly as high there. Now, we also saw about 20 inches of rain with that storm. This time around, not expecting that, only about 6 to 12 inches. So lesser rain, lesser storm surge. This will not be the worst storm you've seen in the last 10 years, if that gives a little bit of context.
Well, I think the question now is just kind of what's your last minute advice here to people? I mean, is it okay still to try to sandbag? Does that matter? Is it too late? I mean, what can you still do? Because we are getting kind of close now.
Yeah. I mean, landfall along the Gulf Coast is now about 12 hours away. Our worst impacts are now about 12 to 18 hours. I would say if you have any last minute planning, preparations that you need to do, you do still have time. The sandbagging, you still have time to do that. I would say from now up until the time the sun sets here tonight, Jeannie, folks, do the last of your prep work, get those sandbags up. Make sure you have supplies in case we do lose power, especially if you live in St. Johns County, for St. Augustine, Flagler County, Putnam County. Do not be surprised if you do lose power here. Those wind gusts are going to be greater than likely 70 to, if not 80 miles per hour, especially late tonight and into early tomorrow morning. So I'd say you have maybe about another 6 hours left to do your last minute planning and prep. And then after that, hunker down, keep you and your loved ones close and safe, your furry friends as well. I know we're big dog lovers,
Jeannie
and I.
We are big dog lovers. So I hope this isn't too windy. My dog last time during Helene, we have a rescue. His name's Riley. And he doesn't usually get scared during thunder and lightning. He hates fireworks. But all of a sudden I noticed he was gone out of the living room and he was in the closet. That's where he goes when he's scared. And his tail was up, he was panting. And I think it was the shrieking of the winds last time. And I've never seen him so nervous during a storm. Maybe you have a dog or a cat and you see them react, but will it be that loud this time?
It certainly could be again.
Oh,
yeah, I mean, for Helene, wind gusts were 60 to 70. We had a couple isolated wind gusts of 80 out at the beaches. I know where you live, Jeannie. We saw about 60 to 65 mile per hour wind gusts. So yeah, we could certainly see that again. Again, wind would be pretty similar for the Jacksonville area for Milton as it was for Helene. So try to calm them down, give them a treat, some belly rubs, an ear scratch. Do whatever you can to console them as best you can. And maybe the bad thing a little bit with this is it is going to be a slower moving storm. Helene kind of came through pretty quickly and moved north. This will be a much slower storm, so you're going to have several hours, an 8-hour period potentially of some, pretty strong gusty winds.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that a tree doesn't go on. I know you may have that fear at your house, or maybe like some people on our staff, they live in newer neighborhoods and they don't have any trees. But during a storm like this, for all of us in older neighborhoods, I love trees.
Yes.
And this is going to be hard. We had a small tree go down when I got home from Helene. It was like 1 or 2 in the morning. And my husband walks in and he goes, "Oh, we have a problem." I'm like, "What was that?" And I heard a thud, and it was a tree. It splintered off of another tree, and so it did a little bit of damage. But it's amazing how it just happens all of a sudden, and you wouldn't think you're going to have that problem. And I know for all of you who have like water oaks and big trees around your house, that is a fear.
Yes.
And the ground is already really, really wet. And I don't know exactly what. There's nothing you could do. I mean, you just sit there.
That will certainly be a concern. The ground's very saturated. I mean, over the weekend we got a decent amount of rain. We've already picked up a half inch of rain so far here today. Where I live, there's just water laying out in an open field, which typically is dry. So yeah, with how saturated the ground is, you get a 60 or 70 mile per hour wind gust at what once may have looked like a sturdy tree. Might have some inner rot on the inside of that trunk and could certainly, get blown over. So
before we conclude here, let's talk a little bit about Putnam County. I was in Wielaka day before yesterday. I'm talking to a lot of folks down there. And there was a guy I met from New Jersey. He had just moved here.
Okay.
And he said he was just all excited about living in Wielaka. He thought it was beautiful, and he was told that his house wouldn't flood. But he lives along the water, and I'm not so sure that's really the
Yes.
case. That might have been a salesperson who told him that. He was getting sandbags out, and he does live along that canal area. So the people I was speaking with said that, if something happens, we're going to pull together as a community. That we're going to go out, we're going to get food to people, we're going to get everything we possibly can. So that's the great thing about the First Coast. So if you're new here, there's so much support here. You're not ever by yourself. But for Wielaka, Palatka, and Putnam County tonight, what do you think?
A 2 to 4 foot surge for those folks. So if you live right along the canal, right along that river there, it certainly will be a possibility. 6 to 10 inches of rain for Putnam County possible as well, which could potentially add to that flooding risk. With regards to the winds, sustained, could see upwards of anywhere between 40 to 60. Wind gusts, 65 to 70, if not 80 miles per hour. Also a very good possibility for you folks down there in Putnam County. Putnam, St. John's, Flagler, those are really our 3 main counties that we're going to be locked in on for, possibly the worst impacts and, most or extensive damage here, Jeannie.
And we should tell everybody that we have a big, huge team of reporters already spread out all over the First Coast. And so today at 4 o'clock on NBC 12 WTLV, we'll be starting to hear from those reporters who are scattered out in safe places. We've already had one reporter team around Palm Coast that they were told they may have to evacuate and move to a different site. But they are trying to get as close to anything so you can see what's going on and you can stay at home and be safe. So you can join us today at 4 o'clock on First Coast News on NBC, and then at 5, 6, and also 7 o'clock tonight, we'll be on giving you the very latest information. And we'll get through it. We always do.
We always do.
We always do. We just hope it isn't as bad as some people worry about. So
yes.
thank you so much for your expertise.
Yes, she is Jeannie Blaylock. I'm meteorologist Ross Mummah. As she said, we will have more coming up live on First Coast News, but for now, I think that's all we've got for you.
That's right. Thanks. Stay safe, everybody.
Take care.